Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 110.
I have an interesting question for you this episode, Ben. You are you're living in an undisclosed location in a foreign country. Do you have outlets in the walls? Can you plug devices into outlets where you're at?
Yes.
Okay, what kind of outlet do you have? Are you rocking the American style, or do you have like some weird European plugs you've got to conform to?
They're the British style, which have some pros and cons, but they run 240 volts.
Interesting. And this is what I was going to get at. I'm going to do a lot of this is like wishy-washy, listeners, so do your own due diligence research. But a vast majority of other countries actually use a 220 to 240 volt system for all the appliances that exist like in their household. But in America, the standard is, and you'll hear this, it's 110 to 120 volt. People call it 110. It's actually 120. That's the episode, by the way. Just get that out of the way. Episode 110. Woo! Do you know why American standard is 110 to 120 volt, Ben?
I have a feeling this is one of those things like Betamax versus VHS, but go ahead.
It actually isn't. This is one of those things that first one to the market determined how everyone else was going to operate. And so when Edison invented his light bulb and started mass producing it, he settled on 110 volts as enough to make it bright enough to be usable, but not so much that the light bulb would burn out quickly. And so it was just like a compromise in a lab that they made. And then, people started getting their houses wired to have electric lights. But there were no outlets. There was no such thing as an electrical outlet. People thought the lights were the only thing that was going to be electrical until other people started innovating. Hey, there's electricity in the walls in these people's houses. Let's use that. We can make things that utilize the electricity that they've already brought in. And we can
then
do
they
stuff.
started making fans and...
Well, they started making those sockets that they're really old. You can still find them at the store sometimes, where you unscrew a light bulb and you screw in an electrical socket. It has the two prongs, and it's just threaded into like your normal light bulb socket.
Yeah, I've seen those.
That happened first because people didn't have electrical sockets. They had just the light bulb sockets, and they would unscrew the light bulb. They would screw in the little socket, and they would plug in these other third-party machines that people were making based on the fact that consumers had 110 volts in their house for Edison's light bulbs.
110 volts was just this arbitrary voltage that was how much made a light bulb burn bright enough but not burn out based on the materials Edison used when he invented it.
Right. And then because that became so popular and that was already in people's houses, other people piggybacked on the work that the companies were putting in the 110 volts and started making products for 110 volts. Then fast forward even farther, and now we're designing an American utility electrical grid. So what voltage do we use? Well, everybody uses 110 volts. Here's how we'll fix that problem. We'll run 120 volts on each leg of two legs that go into your house. So your house technically has 240 volts delivered to it from the utility bill, or from the utility provider, whoever that is in your area. And all of your outlets in your house only have one hot leg. Aside from like if you have an electric dryer, if you have very big appliances, your oven, the big stuff, those will have 210 volts. Air conditioner. And they'll have a separate socket type. They'll have different wiring requirements. But most of the things in your house are 110 volts because of freaking Thomas Edison.
Huh. Yeah, I feel like those are the most permanent kinds of decisions that happened a long time ago, and then they just stick forever because changing the standard would be so painful. Like when in Sweden changed from driving on the left-hand side of the road to the right-hand side of the road. Like it blows my mind that they even decided to do that as an entire country. One day, everyone just started driving on the other side of the road.
I feel like small European countries can get away with stuff like that just because the population is so much smaller. Like the reaching out to everyone in the country is a lot less of a logistical challenge when like geographically and numerically your country is that much smaller. Can you imagine trying to make that kind of switch and getting that information to like rural Kansas in the middle of no place to make sure that on Tuesday, Jim Bob is going to start driving his tractor on the left side of the road instead of the right?
Yeah, well, how much worse would it be if, like, okay, on Tuesday, on the 17th of November, all your outlets are going to start putting out twice as much voltage, and anything that isn't up to spec is going to light on fire.
It's just everything in your house just starts exploding. Yeah, that's
Have you ever plugged a 110-volt appliance into a 220-volt circuit?
Okay, so first of all, no, because they make it so you can't. Like 110 volt outlets are different shapes than the 210
You
volt.
think so, but there's adapters all over this base and idiots everywhere. The Canadians have almost lit their dorms on fire twice. We bought 3 new vacuums, and no less than the ground safety people put an adapter on it, plugged it into the 220, and blew up the motor the first day they used it. But here's the coup de grace. So when we got to Italy, we were trying to figure out all of our appliances we bought with them, how many would work on the power system, and you have to look at the little tiny like inscripted print right next to where the power cord goes into the appliance, and it tells you whether or not, because some American power appliances that have the standard American outlet will actually accept 220 volts power. Notably, things that are made for traveling, like razors and laptops and those kinds of things. All those will accept the full range of voltage from 110 to 240.
Actually, your computers will too. Like if you have a desktop computer, there's a switch on the back of the power supply that tells it, hey, are you 220 volts or are you 110 volts?
You got ahead of me. So I told my kids to be very careful when they were plugging all the appliances. And he said, okay. So we got the computer out and we got it. And I had a brain fart and forgot to flip the little switch on the back of the power supply.
Oh, torch the power supply.
And torched the power supply. And it was dramatic. Flames shot out, smoke, the whole 9 yards. And my son was sitting there with his mouth agape and he said, Dad. I'm like, what? He said, I thought you were lying to me when you said they would blow up.
What a great teachable moment. That put the fear of electricity in your kids forever. That's outstanding.
And you think your parents being dramatic when they say don't plug the 110 volt appliances into the 220 power or they'll blow up. They're like, oh yeah, that's just an adult saying the kind of things adults say. Nope.
They will actually explode, kids. It's funny you mentioned that because I thought about this. I was doing this research and realizing, holy crap, this is all based on one guy just guesstimating in his lab based on the materials that he had. Now, if we were to say, like, I don't know, king for a day, like magical genie wishes, you can replace the power infrastructure in America with any kind of voltage that you want. Would we change it? Is this the ideal solution, or is this just what evolved over time based on one dude guessing in a lab?
I don't actually know the answer to that, but I read an entire article in like Car and Driver on the fact that we have this problem with automobiles because the batteries in automobiles are 12 volts and it's not enough for most of this modern system, particularly with the prominence of electronics now in the user space. Okay. And it would be much better if cars were 40 volts. And it feels like that one would be easier to change.
I mean, probably, because only everything internal to the car has to be consistent with the voltage, right? And then as long as you're providing set voltages to the consumer with the outlets, like the outlets are converted or whatever to whatever voltage they're expecting them to be.
Right. Like your car, of course, doesn't have a 12-volt battery in it.
No, my car has, I don't even know what voltage my car runs on. Probably scary numbers.
Yeah. Well, then we'd have to get into wattage and amperage and all those other things. That's a discussion for another time.
I took an electrical engineering class, but like that was a long time ago.
All right, Josh, we need to follow up on something from the last episode, 109. So you and I kind of had a hypothetical, one of those things where you can research later. And I just said out loud, I think 109 is a prime number. And you said, there's no way it's a prime number.
There's no way I looked it up. Prime. It ends at 9. It's got to be divisible by 3.
It isn't just a prime number, it's a special kind of prime number.
It's just to spite me, the universe decided that 109 was super prime.
It's a super prime.
I was being facetious. Is it actually called a super prime?
It's a super prime. 109 is the 10th super prime.
On the 6th day, God said, you know what? 109 is going to be a super prime because that's going to get Josh Fleshman so good in a couple of thousand years.
Yeah. All right. We had a listener ask a question that I don't think we've gotten to, and I want to talk about for a sec. They said, Ben, it seems kind of incongruent that you're always talking about being skeptical of the efficacy of the government, and yet you work for the government.
Oh, listener, like you should be able to get this. It's because Ben works for the government that he's skeptical of the efficacy of the government.
That's right. And if you want to see, and I'm going to make a photo montage on the photo album on our Facebook page, look up the meme military grade. Oh man, there are dozens and dozens of versions of the military grade meme.
Here's my counter to this. And the question that wasn't asked is I'm always saying that the government should be the thing that has authority over stuff. But I got out of government work as soon as I realized it was bad for me. So how do those two things jive? And that's because just because I don't like working for the government doesn't mean I saw, it's horribly bureaucratic and bloated and inefficient, but boy, howdy, they're effective. Like when the military says they're going to go bomb a target, it may cost way more than it needs to and take way longer with way more people involved, but they still blow up that target.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason I'm skeptical of these things is I see the stuff that we want to do and we're trying to do that we don't. So I guess you're measuring the effectiveness on things like blowing up a target.
That's still a really low level thing, man. Like, bureaucracy consistently will screw up all of the tertiary and like lower objectives of a mission. But like the high level stuff, like almost by definition, they get it right. Man, I'm opening myself up for so many counterexamples, but I'm not going to accept them at this moment.
No, my main skepticism is when anyone presents some kind of vast conspiracy that requires the government to be secretive and well coordinated and focused over a long period of time. I just completely dismiss that as utterly implausible.
So secretive, no, that's never going to happen. The government, by definition, almost always should operate with full transparency. But then consistently over a long period of time, like I can't think of a better organization to like be focused on one thing for a long time other than the immovable bureaucracy of the government.
I think we're measuring with different sticks, but I agree with what you're saying. But also, like if our foreign policy towards one thing is one way for one president, and then 4 years later we elect another president, and then we have a different policy, and then 4 years later, 2 years later, our government, our House and Senate switch parties, and now the funding dries up. I mean, how can you get anything done?
I get what you're saying, but my counterexample is this: like through all of these administrative changes, through all of these legislative changes, through all of the years, the IRS is consistent, sir. That building is still there, and it still wants your money. So
bureaucracies only have one purpose. To protect themselves.
Oh dear. All right. Well, oh man, this is going to devolve. Like that's it. All right, forget it. Rest of the podcast is over. This is it. We're doing it again. Get ready for round two.
I need to be vulnerable for a sec, Josh, and talk about one of my podcasting weaknesses.
Oh no. Okay.
Sometimes I'll be thinking about the next thing that I'm supposed to say and I won't listen to you. But then later when I have to edit the podcast or when I listen to it the third time, I hear it both times and I'm like, oh, you idiot. Because that's one of the feedbacks that get most consistently from some of our listeners, that you say really brilliant, interesting things and I'm a space cadet and don't respond to them.
This goes back to just the way we approach this. You write up these super formal and fancy notes. You're very passionate and professional about being a podcaster. And I'm literally sitting here drinking beers and BSing with my buddy.
Well, okay, so last time you and I were talking about the old technology that's present in the movie Office Space from 1999, and we were talking about 3.5-inch floppy disks. Josh, I grew up with those. They were my one true love as a child. Like those things were everywhere, and I knew about them. And you asked me what the storage capacity of a 3.5-inch floppy disk was. Josh, I know that all day long, up and down. I just was thinking about something else. I didn't answer your question. So, Josh, the capacity of a 3.5-inch floppy disk is 1.44 megabytes.
Megabytes. For all you Zoomers out there, a megabyte is 1,000th of a gigabyte. I have a USB stick that I was transferring files on the other day. It is smaller than like my smallest finger. I bought it for $10 and it has a 32 gigabyte capacity.
Yeah, and you can pack a terabyte in one of those things.
Yeah.
Okay, so all you listeners that were yelling at your podcast player of your choice to me that the answer to Josh's question is 1.44 megabytes. Thank you. I'm sorry I let you down.
Now, hang on a second. Anybody that knew the answer to that question was not yelling at their podcast player. They were adjusting their hearing aid down first and then like grumpily like growling at it. It's 1.44. These freaking kids don't remember things.
And for some reason, we have listeners that we consistently insult that keep coming back for more. So thank you. Now, I want to talk about something else kind of along these same lines. And that is, I listened to another podcast that I really like that's by two popular personalities on the internet, John and Hank Green. John Green is a popular author, has written books such as A Fault in Our Stars or Paper Towns. His books get turned into movies a lot. He's very popular on social media. His brother Hank Green is a popular YouTuber, and he's popular on TikTok. And he makes like science-y videos and is known for his background in animal sciences and stuff like that. Anyway, 6 months ago, they released a weekly podcast very similar to ours in format. I think they're copying us. And 6 months ago, they released a regular weekly episode, and they started off with their jokes, and then the mood got really somber, and Hank Green revealed that he was suffering from cancer.
Oh, yes, I'm aware of this.
And the podcast went dark for 6 months.
They're back now, though.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to get at.
Okay.
They'd done it weekly for years and years, and I was listening to it, almost weekly. There was bumps and stuff, but never more than a week or two that they'd taken off. And then 6 months of darkness. Reveal that one of the hosts has cancer, and then gone. So how were you tracking it? What was your knowledge of it?
So Hank Green, like you said, is popular on social media, and he actually has a very active TikTok account. And so I see.
Oh, so you follow him on TikTok?
Yeah. So I got pseudo live updates when he went into remission and came back and started doing things again.
Well, I'm not on TikTok, so I didn't know anything for 6 months until they came back on last week.
So TikTok is where all the news is happening. All of the good information is coming out of TikTok. I'm not even going to lie to you, Ben. There are 3 people that I subscribe to on TikTok that do the news better than any cable news network that I've ever seen. And okay. I get a lot of really valid and pertinent information from them. So then,
I don't want that news. I want the Hank Green news.
And Gen Z is also getting all their news from TikTok. So the government wants to ban. I don't. You know what? I've completely reversed course on TikTok. I think it's great. I think everybody should have TikTok.
Wow. That was a dramatic reversal in the space of a couple of months.
Well, okay, subscribing to people like Hank Green and these news people have made it it used to be thirst traps and goofy memes, and it still is that a lot of the time. But it's also valuable information that I'm getting through this thing that I'm already looking at.
So Hank got cancer and went into chemotherapy and radiation treatment. And apparently right now he's in remission, and they came back on. And they kind of took this moment, Hank and John, to, I don't know, take down some of the shields we have sometimes when we're affectionate for someone, particularly like a platonic male friendship, where you let your guard down a little bit and be like, man, I almost lost you. And that kind of made me realize how much I appreciate having you in my life. So they had this moment, almost like a state of the podcast. They're like, hey, we're going to keep podcasting, but we're not going to worry so much about some of those things we used to worry about anymore. You never know how many days you have left on this earth. And we're just going to appreciate the fact that we're 2 brothers that love to get together and talk, and you guys get to listen in on it. And I was like, yeah, I can relate to that.
Oh, did you want to have a say to the podcast? Are you going to announce something dramatic right now? Or is the foundation of our friendship going to change forever in the next few minutes?
Well,
what's happening?
Okay, kind of. So, Josh, as you know, I'm in the Middle East. I was here doing what some people would just call like a paid government vacation to a sunny location, and then like a real war broke out, and the threat's real, and bad stuff is happening, and it could get worse before it gets better, and I could be in danger. One day you could just come on the podcast and it would be the last episode of you talking by yourself and thanking our listeners, and that's the end.
Oh, you're assuming I would do that. Listen, I would do something. I wouldn't just leave you hanging, listeners.
Yeah. Anyway, I think I've said all I have to say about that.
Oh, you're just feeling vulnerable and scared. Oh, Ben. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to undermine that with my crass sense of non-empathetic humor, but if you're upset, buddy, I wish I could give you a hug. Everything's gonna be okay. You're gonna be all
Thanks,
right,
Josh.
And you're gonna come back. What is it? Not even 6 weeks now. It's 5 weeks or something, isn't it?
Yeah.
You'll be back. You'll be with your family again. You'll be in beautiful, lovely, ever-pleasant Shreveport, Louisiana. And, life will be good. It's going to be okay, buddy. You're going to make it through.
All right. Well, we'll bring you to... We're so regular at our release schedule. And when I say regular, I mean we've maintained, the exact same day of the week release for, 4 years running.
Woo! I mean, mostly that's just because we're so lazy that we can't get it done over the weekend, and we have to wait until Thursday.
Yeah, so if it doesn't come out on a Thursday, I think we've reached the point where people could probably wonder if something's wrong.
All right, I'm gonna put a little more minutia on that. If our podcast doesn't come out on a Thursday, your panic should increase linearly with the number of days that pass. So if it goes 4 days without a release, now you should be really panicking.
Yeah. All right, there's one other thing that's happening, and since this is a Bad at Magic podcast, we occasionally should talk about magic, I suppose. And as is the case. They're constantly kind of trying to come up with new ways to sell us Magic cards, and it usually works. They're changing the way that packs are packaged as far as the rarity levels and stuff with new play packs.
Whoa.
But I don't want to talk about that.
You don't want to talk about that? That's monumental. That's like earth-shattering news coming from Wizards of the Coast.
But they keep changing. You know, when I first came in, there was there were sealed decks that had like random cards in it, and then they changed it to booster pack. You know, only booster packs, and now there's set boosters and collectors boosters and draft boosters, and that all got confusing and probably fractured their sales, and so now they're just going to play boosters. Is that what it's called?
Yes, so they're consolidating. Set boosters were the more premium product than draft boosters, but they weren't draftable. They didn't have enough cards in it to do a draft, so you had to pay draft boosters to play draft, and you got set boosters because they had a higher value. They had a better distribution of rarities in the packs, and so. Like, I don't know how anybody could see this from happening, but people stopped buying draft boosters because the set boosters were better bang for your buck. And so they decided, well, this is bad. We need to keep making draft boosters because we want to keep having, like, draft. But they're not making us any money anymore. And so they are just combining the two. Basically, they'll just say, oh, we're replacing both of them with a play booster. That's kind of BS. What they're doing is they're making a set booster draftable, and they're getting rid of draft boosters. And they're just calling it play boosters.
Okay, so that's the functional gears underneath the machine. But on the surface, they're also, you know, as they do every couple of months, are releasing new and interesting intellectual properties. And for the first time ever, they're going to have Marvel as one of their partners for intellectual property.
I'm not going to lie to you, Ben. This one completely slid under my radar. The first I heard about this was at Friday Night Magic last night. Because I've been seeing the previews they're doing a crossover, Universes Beyond, they call it, with Fallout, which the Fallout franchise of our first-person RPG video games, I'm a huge fan. I've played all the Fallout games. They're fantastic. The couple of previews that they've shown, I think they're knocking it out of the park flavor-wise, and they're going to be very interesting card designs. I had no idea that they were making Marvel cards until somebody mentioned it at F&M last night. And the only thing that I could think was, how is that even possible? Because Disney has its own trading card game that they're releasing right now. Like, it just started coming out a couple months ago called Lorcana, where you play with all the Disney animated characters on cards.
Yeah, maybe this is like Garfield Collectibles. Like, they'll just sell a license to anybody that wants it.
Oh, Marvel? Marvel's just that bad?
Yeah, you're right. It feels like a bit cannibalistic. Like, these would just compete against each other. Why would they agree to this?
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, like, why would you give the intellectual property rights for a trading card game for Marvel to anybody but your own internal trading card game? Is it just a flavor decision? Do they not want Captain America to be killed by Goofy on the field of battle?
Well, whatever the case is, there about to be some Marvel intellectual property Magic cards. Do you think it'll be like Lord of the Rings and they'll become staples and completely warp the format, or will it just be like some of the under the radar secret layers that don't actually change anything and just go in a few commander decks here and there?
Well, and that's the thing is the way that they treat these Universes Beyonds has been different every time we've seen it. The most recent one they did was Doctor Who. Doctor Who, they released 4 commander decks. What was interesting about that, though, is if you really dig into it, those decks contain more than 250 unique card designs, cards that have never been printed in Magic before. And the professor on TCC correctly compared that to, this is basically a Doctor Who set that was released by Wizards of the Coast. That was just
in 4 commander decks.
That was packaged into 4 commander decks, which is upside and downside. One, yeah, you can't draft a Doctor Who draft. But if you want every single card that came out in the Doctor Who set, you just
go buy those 4 commander decks.
You buy 4 commander decks, and you have every unique card that they printed in Doctor Who. So
for about the price of a box.
Yeah, which is really cool. And I don't know if you've looked at any of the Doctor Who decks, but I'm interested in one of them. They actually look really fun to play. I'm not a big fan of Doctor Who. I know I'm a nerd, and I know this is a blind spot that I have in nerd culture. But it's one of those things. It's like One Piece, the anime. There's 10,000 episodes. There's no possible way I can get into it now. I don't have the time.
My wife is a huge Doctor Who fan. Huge. I think she's seen every episode. But I don't even think this... There's just places where nerds don't cross over.
Okay.
And I don't like Doctor Who, and I don't think if I bought Doctor Who Commander decks and sat down with her and said, "Hey, let's play Magic together. You like Doctor Who, right?" She wouldn't be like, "Yeah, sure."
So from all of the Doctor Who like fanatics that I've talked to, apparently they knocked the flavor of those cards out of the park. Like the way that the mechanics work for the characters and things, and they have like every named character that's ever been in Doctor Who. So maybe she's not going to sit down and play a game with you, but at the same time, maybe she wouldn't hate it just to look at and have as like a trinket or something to put on a shelf.
Yeah. I also feel you mentioned One Piece as well. That was one of those things you're like, okay, I've always had kind of a blind spot in nerddom for anime, and a lot of people like One Piece, so maybe I'll give it a chance. So I just looked it up on like Amazon Prime or whatever, and I went to the first episode and I watched it and I was like, that was horrible. And then I started watching the second episode and I was just like, no, I can't do this.
Okay, One Piece is it's that's too deep. Like that's deep into anime fandom. That's not a gateway drug to anime. Like if I have a non-anime fan come to me and say, "Oh, what anime should I watch as my first one?" The first question I'm going to ask for you is like, "Do you prefer like fantasy or sci-fi?" So I'm asking you, Ben, fantasy or sci-fi?
Fantasy, I guess.
Fantasy. Okay. Then my recommendation, honestly, is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. And like every weeb or every anime person that's listening to this podcast, like, oh, of course that's the one that he's going to say. He's like, yeah, of course that's the one I'm going to say. It's solid. It's relatable. I mean, like it's a good gateway drug to anime.
Okay, but I want to go back to where I went wrong with One Piece.
Okay.
Because I didn't feel like I was doing something. You mentioned it as being too deep in anime to get into, but I didn't feel like I was doing that. I thought I was picking something that would be borderline fringe, public, mainstream accessible, and it just wasn't. I couldn't.
Yeah, it has a lot of media presence right now in the zeitgeist. Like a lot of people were talking about it because
there's a new trading card game out about it that people are into. It had a movie, I think, or no, there's like a live action series of it on Amazon Prime or something.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of things are lining up all at the same time to make it like super popular. Another thing was that it's been running for like a super long time, and again, don't come at me, all the anime fandoms out there. I'm not super into One Piece, but from what I understand, like it finally culminated in the thing. Like the protagonist of the series says in the first episode, "I want to be king of the pirates." And I think just now, like current timeline in the universe we live in, that just happened. So I think
after 10 years,
after however long it's been running. Yeah. So I think they might have just wrapped it up like story wise.
And we make this joke frequently on this podcast about how you only need to try the first 700 of them, and then it really gets good.
These first 200 bites of dirt were not so great. Maybe the next one will be better.
All right, Josh, I think you have a bad at segment for us.
I do. Okay, so I was thinking about this the other day when my wife approached me and she was seeing in social media, "Hey, we need to go get a new bucket." What do you mean? Well, we're going to be putting out candy for Halloween on our front porch, and we need to get a new colored bucket. I'm like, what do we need a new colored bucket for? We've got the normal one, and now we've got the teal one. That's for the food allergies. Why do we need a new one? Well, apparently there's a purple one now. And so I started looking into it. I looked it up, and actually we don't need a new bucket. It turns out there will be a new colored bucket that is roaming the streets for trick-or-treaters, okay? So for people that don't know, if a kid comes to your door and they have a teal bucket, what that means is that they have a food allergy, and so you should probably not give them any candy with peanuts. On the flip side, if you're leaving buckets of candy out, you should have, well, you should. That's judgmental. If you want to, it's nice of you to put out a teal bucket that has candy in it that is that doesn't have allergens. That way those kids know that it's safe to take that candy. If a kid comes to your door with a purple bucket, this was new to me, it apparently means that they have epilepsy. And so if you see these kids approaching your house, you shouldn't be doing like the strobe lights and all the flashings. Like you should tone that down while they're there just to be considerate of their condition. The latest one, I had never heard of this one until this year, was the blue bucket. So if a kid approaches your house, or like a young man approaches your house, or a young woman approaches your house with a blue bucket, that means that they have autism. So they could be nonverbal, so expecting them to say trick or treat might not happen. And they also may appear to be much older than your standard trick or treater should be. And so, like, just reading about these things, like I just love the idea of having a visible nonverbal cue to communicate with the world how you are supposed to interact with me. And one of the most recent examples I can think of is we went to MagicCon 2019. I think right after, no, it wasn't 2019. It was right after COVID stopped, and we went to MagicCon Vegas again for the first time. They reopened it, right? And we were going through the lines, and they checked made sure we had our immunizations and our vaccinations and all that stuff.
Yes, I remember.
And they gave us the bracelets, and they asked us. They had a green, yellow, and a red bracelet. And they said, okay, how much physical contact are you okay with other people at the con and your opponents? And if you got a green bracelet, it was like, yeah, that's fine, no problem. High fives, hugs, whatever, I don't care. Yellow was like, I'm okay for touches, but you need to ask me first. And red was, don't touch me or any of my stuff. I'm like, for whatever reason. And
okay, so which color did you pick?
I was yellow. Like, I'm okay with things, but you need to ask me. Like, consent first, please. But this, like, so between those wristbands, because they didn't have them this year at Vegas, and I was, honestly, Ben, I was a little sad. Like, I wanted the bracelet. And then, so with the bracelets and then now the Halloween buckets, I realized this is something we should do. Like, can we please normalize nonverbal, visible cues of how you are supposed to interact with me?
I have so many thoughts about this, Josh. So many. Okay, so I'm gonna take a tangent. It's related. Just bear with me for a second.
Okay.
I was reading. I was reading the New York Times. I have a subscription. I was reading the New York Times, and there was their advice column that they run, and one of the headlines intrigued me, so I went in, and it was this person in a workplace that was complaining about someone's signature block that had gender pronouns in it. And they weren't complaining about the gender pronouns. They were complaining about the fact that the person had used a bilingual gender pronoun. So it's like they were signaling their gender identity and their cultural identity. And the person was upset because they felt like that was a reserved space for only signaling one kind of information, and they felt like it was social appropriation to utilize that space for something else.
Okay. Like we have accepted in society that we are going to put that pronouns in a signature block are accepted. And actually, I think that's wonderful because I personally knew an elderly man named Leslie who was constantly being called ma'am via email because people just assumed his gender. I'm sure he is very much benefiting from the he, him after his name when he puts it
even though he wasn't the target for that particular social innovation.
But he can totally benefit from it.
He just got a positive externality.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so he was basically expressing his outrage and asking the advice columnist for social permission to go read this person the riot act for appropriating the space in the signature block. Yes, can I yell at this person for utilizing this space in the signature block for this hard-fought social justice that's been given to this one protected segment of the population, and now they're using it for something else that it wasn't intended for? How dare they?
Why can't anybody else benefit from this? Why should only this select class of people benefit from it?
Great. And that's what the advice columnist said, and that's kind of what I want to get at with what you're doing. So there's a risk here. And that is if you try to take something that's designed to convey information and make it convey too much information, it becomes overloaded.
I see. Yeah, we could lose all meaning or all purpose if there's way too many nuanced subcategories of it. Like we need
or everybody wants to pile on, like the ribbons on the back of the people's cars. There's the yellow ribbons and the teal ribbons and the white ribbons and the blue ribbons and the rainbow ribbons, and I can't even keep track of them all anymore. And it's not because I don't care about any one of those causes, but there becomes just like a straw that breaks the camel's back. The thing becomes so associated with meaning that then it loses all meaning.
That makes sense. Okay. I'm with you there. I think we probably shouldn't overload this space, but I'd still like to explore it. If there is some color that I could wear that would indicate that, specifically for me, it'd be, I am friendly, but by default, I don't want to talk to anyone. If I could convey that without having to tell somebody, that'd be great.
Okay, I want to ask you about this because that's a nuanced point you're making, and I don't know that I'd be able to grok it. Isn't I'm friendly, but I don't want to talk to you the same as I'm unfriendly?
I'm unfriendly.
From a stranger interaction purpose.
Maybe this is...
what's the difference?
I think you're right. I think maybe I am just unfriendly, Ben. My self-image is that I'm a nice guy, but I don't want to, by default, interact with strangers. I don't know. But I want... All right, so I don't want to come across as a jerk, but maybe that's what I need. Maybe I just need the color that says I'm a jerk. And then... because then, to me, it's the same, right? Nothing changes. Yeah. People are behaving the way that I expect them to behave with me, but they just get a different idea of who I am.
Okay, I'm going to take another tangent, and I love how you tied my tangent in. It was perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking. Here's another one. I remember moving to a neighborhood that was close enough to a bad neighborhood where there were gangs that used colors to indicate their preferences, that they'd outlawed certain colors of apparel in the school.
Okay.
And I moved in, and I had clothing of those colors, and I never wore it with any kind of intent to make any kind of signals, but now it was out of bounds because of the meaning it had locally.
I see. Okay.
And like, I've seen colored Halloween buckets before where people weren't trying to convey any type of meaning whatsoever. So if I come up and I just happen to have a teal bucket and you won't give me peanut M&Ms and those are my favorite treat, like, what if I don't want to convey meaning?
Well, that's your fault. Like, you took a teal bucket. Like, this
is what I'm saying. If we decide that we're going to take something practical and imbue it with a lot of meaning, now we've ruled out some creative space that otherwise was open palette before.
Okay. I can see that. So by taking the infinite possibilities of the colors of buckets that you could have to go trick-or-treating and carving out one of those colors to try to impact some meaning to keep people from dying on peanut allergies.
No.
You're saying it's an infringement on your freedom? Is that what you're driving at?
We've already established when I quoted Louis C.K. here that I definitely want children with nut allergies to die. But that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if I saw a great sketch on this. I'll see if I can find it and link it in the show notes. But like, if we take a thing that could randomly not mean anything or is intended to mean something very significant, now do we just introduce social confusion? Like, if you're a kid and you come up to my door with a red bucket that just happens to be a red bucket and I look at it and I'm trying to figure out what it means, I'm like, oh crap, I don't know that color. What am I supposed to do? And it doesn't mean anything at all.
This actually ties in very, very well to a much larger problem that I have with the idea of Halloween. Is that we don't have nationalized standards for what Halloween is. And I think we should. I think every household should get a pamphlet at the beginning of October that says, these are the rules for Halloween this year. It should define these colors. It should just say, like, listeners, get behind me on this one. Start writing your congressman today. Halloween should just be the last Saturday of October.
Josh. In the United States of America, we can't even adopt the metric system or get rid of daylight savings time. This is not going to happen.
I know, but that's what drives me nuts. Like, I feel like this is an achievable goal. This is something everybody agrees on. This is what kills me about these large group decisions like this, is that everybody agrees that the way that we're doing things is stupid, but nobody has the agency to change it.
Have you ever stumbled inadvertently into an online debate about what the right form of a pride flag is? Oh my gosh. Everybody once something becomes imbued with meaning, everyone wants to find a way to put their identity in it, and then it just has no meaning whatsoever.
Okay, so is that your feeling about the color-coded Halloween buckets? Is that where
I like what you're saying. I wish I felt like there was a good way that we could agree as simply as we do on things like traffic lights. But even when I say traffic lights, even if you go from one state to another, like some will do the yellow, solid yellow, and some have like a flashing yellow.
That's true.
And some are sideways and some are left. Like, as long as we can stay close enough to a pretty simple core meaning we're trying to convey, I guess I'm okay with it. But as soon as it starts becoming this uncontrolled growth, it's not useful anymore.
Let me propose to you then a simplification of this, okay? If I think then what we should do is we should have like an agreed upon set, a small set of specific ones. So let's pick 5. Let's have 5 unique colors for the Halloween buckets, and that's say if teal is the food allergies one, great. Everybody can agree teal is food allergies. Everyone, teal means food allergies. And then if people want to get more specific, that needs to be a subdivision of that. Oh, if I have a teal bucket with like a blue stripe, that means I have this specific food allergy. And
I feel like this has to transcend buckets.
Well, but, I'm applying this to anything, any nonverbal cue.
I get it. Okay, I'm with you. I got it.
There should be hierarchies, and then but the general public should only ever be responsible for knowing the top level. And then if you want to know the deeper meanings of the rest of them, then that's on you.
Okay, or it could just be a signal to ask. Oh, do you have a teal bucket on purpose? Does that mean, do I need to know something? Tell me what it is I need to know.
Yeah, there you go.
Because, like, for instance, a teal ribbon, I think, signifies sexual assault violence awareness or something like that.
I don't know. You said it earlier. There's so many ribbons. I have no idea. Yes, teal. Wow, you nailed it. Teal ribbon is sexual assault awareness.
Yeah. So like, I guess, should we only have to remember one thing about a color, or do we got to remember a color and an object pair? Like, if it's a teal shirt, it means I like hugs. If it's a teal bucket, it means don't give me peanuts. And if it's a teal ribbon, it means sexual assault awareness. I don't know.
And if it's a teal bracelet, it means I'm friendly, but please don't talk to me.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like this idea, but then I don't know. Maybe
well, if
it's only confined to Halloween, then it's good. But if it's every day, then does a color mean something or doesn't it? Or
this is my hypothesis. Like, I'm identifying this, that people are using Halloween bucket colors to convey information, and that's somehow trickling out into the common knowledge in the populace. Because my wife has been putting out a teal bucket for food allergies for years now. So why can't we just normalize this across the board? Like, we have the technology. We can, like, there's so many ways to disseminate information now. Can we just, like, try to, I don't know what council we would convene.
Okay.
Like, get
all
people
of
together.
My reluctance and all colors. Of my quid pro quos and caveat emptors and all that aside, I'm fine with this. I'm all of my reluctance has gone away. I'm in favor of trying to utilize something simple to convey important information in social interactions.
Yeah, maybe I just want excuses to talk to people less. That might be. I'm just unfriendly, I think is what we came out of this with.
I liked it. It was a good talk. All right, Josh, what are you reading right now? Where are you at in the Wheel of Time?
There it is. Okay. Yeah, the first question, what are you reading? Get out of here. You know exactly what I'm reading. I've been very busy this week, so I'm only halfway through book 2 of the Wheel of Time, The Great Hunt. A lot of people do like this book, and I can see there are high points in this book, but this is not the one that hooked me, personally at least, into the Wheel of Time series. I'm really, like, I'm salivating for book 3. Like, I can't wait to dig into The Dragon Reborn again. But there is a lot of really important, like, foundational work that the author is doing in book 2 that establishes a lot of long-running themes in the rest of the series.
Gonna be honest here, you're not selling it really well.
It's still it's still a very good book. Listen, when I read it the first time, I'm like, wow, The Great Hunt is amazing. And then I read the third book, and I'm like, wow, The Great Hunt is garbage. This book is so much better. That doesn't mean the second book is bad. It just means I like the third one more.
Okay, so you're anticipating the third one, and it's a slog right now. Okay, maybe 100 episodes ago, I can't believe I'm saying this, but maybe 100 episodes ago, you invited me to read the first book with you, and I did. I don't want to have to reread it again to read the second one, but so I had my Audible credit this month, and I was trying to decide what to do with it. I almost spent it on the Great Hunt. I was close. I spent it on something else instead, but
that's fine. You texted me and asked me. It's like, oh, should I get The Great Hunt? And we talked a couple of times. Like, my initial excitement was, yes, please read The Wheel of Time. It's amazing. Everyone should read this. But after I came down from Cloud 9, I realized, you know what? Don't read this book for me. Like, if you don't choose to read this book, you're going to resent it and it's not going to work. And honestly, knowing you, Mr. Humdrum, I see the code in the Matrix, like, it's like most high fantasy books probably aren't going to be your thing anyway.
Yeah. But I think I want to put a marker on this, Josh, and that is that I value our friendship enough that I'm willing to do something for 20 hours just because I like you.
Okay, and I'm going to tell you then, absolutely do not read this book on the basis of our friendship, because I don't want my friendship to be eroded because you don't like fantasy books.
I wouldn't be like, oh, why did Josh make me read this?
Oh, Josh made me read this. I resent him so badly.
All right, I have to. Anything else to say about where you're at in The Great Hunt?
I'm also watching the second season of Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime, and it is insanely different from the books. But I'm still appreciating, like, they're doing things that are very different. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of see why they made these directorial.
Are they trying
decisions.
to do like one book per season?
I don't know if that's what they're doing. It is kind of lining up that way. Like, it makes sense if you think about it, because a book's got a natural 3-act structure. And if you're going to have a series of TV shows, it's nice to have a nice arc across the season. I'm just really skeptical because my favorite scene in all of the books and all of the Wheel of Time happens in like book 6 or 7. And like,
I think they're going to get impatient.
That's fine. I want no spoilers, like, but there's
they're not going to. maintain this audience for 20 seasons or however many books there are. They're going to get impatient, get in a rush to get to the finish.
There are 13 books and a prequel. No, but there's a battle that happens in the 6th book called the Battle of Dumai's Wells. Anybody that's read the Wheel of Time series, everybody that's read the Wheel of Time, just listen to the podcast and be like, yep, that's what we want. Like, that's what I want on TV. I want a big budget company to visualize the Battle of Dumai's Wells because it would be beyond epic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so I was having a dilemma about what to do with my Audible credit. I wasn't worried about it for a few days because I was still working on the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. But I finally settled on a book, which I'm going to talk about a second. I need to take a second to talk about the new Jim Crow. I thought about what to say about this. Like, I kind of planned out some notes and stuff like that, but really I just need to talk from my heart. So I picked this book up because it felt like a vitamin I needed to take. Like, I know that I've been expanding.
I'm not going to like what's in this book, but I need to take it anyway.
Yeah, it wasn't so much not going to like it as like I knew it was going to be painful to confront my white privilege and my assumptions about society and my lack of historical context for some of the things I thought I'd always known. And it was all of those things, Josh. It really was.
Wow.
So Michelle Alexander, she doesn't pull any punches. Like, right in the beginning, she just starts right off this really audacious thesis that I didn't. Okay, I got to tell you how ignorant I am, and I'm being really vulnerable here. I didn't even know what the word Jim Crow meant. Do you know what it means? I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, I know you're not trying to put
but I didn't know what it meant.
I knew what it was. Those were the laws that were put in place after desegregation and after the slaves were freed in the South, where, like, okay, yeah, you're free technically, but we're going to put these laws in place to, like, restrict your freedoms to the point where there's going to be no difference.
What basically established things like separate everything for colored people or not allowed, separate...
Yeah. It was
you sit on the bus and water fountain and bathrooms and pools and
it was codified racism and second citizenship.
Yes. So saying the new Jim Crow is already a very audacious thesis in that she's saying there's something we have now that's as bad as that was then. And that's her thesis. That basically the subtitle is Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And she basically is making the case that our current criminal justice system in America does to blacks now what Jim Crow laws did to blacks in the late 19th and early 20th century. Not having read the book, all of the statistics that I'm aware of, minorities, Black, African Americans, I don't know what the words that we're saying anymore, but marginalized people in America suffer at the hands of the criminal justice system way more than white people do. So she's a civil justice attorney turned, civil rights advocate. I think she would advocate for something, and I want to point out what just happened, that even you and I, as a couple of white guys on our podcast, don't even know whether to say Black or African American. She doesn't want us to worry about that. Like, that just small worry about what our vocabulary is about that's not the issue. Like, the real issue is she wants people to be able to talk about the problem, which is that our criminal justice system incarcerates Black Americans at a rate well above their proportion of the population. And it's because over time, the system that created slavery and then created Jim Crow laws and then had the Civil Rights Act has kind of hidden the fact that we are still discriminating against blacks in America, but it's hidden.
Yeah.
The fact that we say that we don't use racist vocabulary allows us to hide the fact that we are incarcerating and basically condemning these people for life. Even when they get out of prison, now they bear the mark. They can't get good jobs. They can't vote ever again. It's horrible. The prison system is bad. It destroys communities. So I just came away from this with a really profound sense of the brokenness of our justice system. I mean, we have an incarceration rate in the United States of America higher than any other country in the developed world, with one exception. It's an outlier, and it's not even important to point out. And we got to do something about it. So she makes this really audacious thesis and then just backs it up with evidence. Because at first I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. And then I read the whole thing. And in every chapter, she just gives statistics and historical facts and important events and legislation and points things out. Like, man, she saved it kind of for the end. But there was this one chapter where she read the profit and loss statement for one of the companies that builds prisons for state governments. And
Oh,
their
yeah.
bottom line is tied to how many people are in jail. And they talked about how social trends towards incarceration impacts their shareholder value.
Yeah.
And basically, we've created a situation where corporations are incentivized to encourage incarceration of people, regardless of whatever crime we're trying to.
And these are corporations with money that will hire lobbyists, that will influence governance, and they have the agency to make the changes that they want to see in their own profit margin. You're always talking about misaligned incentives. This is another source of this is probably not good. Like the prison,
it's not.
The system that incarcerates criminals shouldn't be incentivized for the world to incarcerate more people. Like their focus should be.
That's the point she was making.
Yeah, the focus should be either rehabilitation or I don't know what. I don't know enough about criminal justice to say where the line is between removing somebody from society permanently versus can this person be rehabilitated.
She doesn't pull any punches though. I think she started with Richard Nixon and eviscerated every single president of both parties from him to present based on their stance, how a lot of them have made a lot of political hay over the fact that they can say they're tough against crime, and that seems to get bipartisan support. But tough against crime is hidden in the language of colorblindness and turns out to be discriminatory against minorities.
This is a complete tangent, but people... this was a soundbite a couple of years ago, and it still pops up every once in a while. This idea of, quote, defund the police. And there are people that are screaming that as they just want to defund the police, taking that at face value. And my problem is that certain aspects of our society are saying that, they don't want to punish criminals. They want the police not to do anything. That's not what defund the police means. And defund the police just means the police shouldn't be doing things that the police aren't trained or able to do. The best example that always comes up is a domestic disturbance. There's these possibilities for things to spin out of control and escalate to violence. But at the time of a domestic dispute that is happening, no crime has been committed. It's just two people that are very heated, which is a bad situation. But if you send a police officer who his whole life he's been trained, this is the situation where you draw your gun and kill the guy versus this is where you use your taser. He's going to approach that situation very differently than a person that is trained to de-escalate conflicts between two aggravated people. And there's no data to back this up, but how many situations could we avoid incarceration, or could we avoid unnecessary arrests in a domestic disturbance situation if we sent somebody to de-escalate and help these people through their current problem? Versus sending police officers whose only real option is write them a ticket, arrest them, or shoot them. Yeah.
All right, I want to say a few more things about this, and then we'll move on. Okay. So she says, that in the mid 20th century we made some laws that did away with what we considered to be the Jim Crow laws. The 1954 decision, Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, where an all-white Supreme Court had a unanimous decision against the Topeka Board of Education for segregation in their schools. Then there was the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and then the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and made discrimination by color all but illegal. And the thesis that she's making, which I'm already predisposed against just because, as I've established, I don't believe in vast conspiracies, but she basically makes a pretty strong case that our criminal justice system has turned into a replacement for all of that. That the people who were racist didn't go away. They were just okay, well, we'll do this another way where we don't say racist things, but we're still punishing minorities at a rate well above that of the population.
My personal belief, and I'm going to get a little... don't come at me, listeners. Either if you don't agree with me, whatever, I don't care. But my personal belief that I hold is that this is an emergent property of the systems that we have put into place. We put into place systems with the best of intent, but then there are emergent properties in the bureaucracy or the little decisions that have to be made. It's easy for a president or the House of Representatives to say, this is the law. But then they pass down this vague verbiage to an organization.
That's exactly
and they say okay, implement this. And there's so much gray area that the people in that organization have to make decisions one way or the other. And it's easy for bad actors in positions of even middle manager level power to make decisions that then make the entire process lean one way or the other based on just their interpretation of what the law is.
And so one of her points that she's kind of trying to hammer home throughout this whole thing is that there are a lot of people that care a lot about race that influence those systems in those ways to make it unfair towards black minorities in the United States of America. And I came away from it convinced. I believe her. So I want to read one last quote from her and we'll move on. She said, "I came to see that mass incarceration in the United States had, in fact, emerged as a stunningly comprehensive and well-disguised system of racialized social control that functions in a manner strikingly similar to Jim Crow."
Wow.
So if you want to know about that, read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
I want to put this footnote on it too, is because this ties in really well to the other book we read, the Invisible Women, talking about male default thinking and gender bias in large sets of data. This is kind of the same thing, because even somebody with the best of intentions that is ignorant to the kind of struggles that minorities face in America will interpret the law and make decisions thinking they're doing the best thing that they possibly can without realizing.
Just justified as like we're being tough on crime.
Oh yeah, but they could try to do the right things without realizing how it's impacting people with experiences that they don't know about. The same way that like you and me as men, we don't think about the fact that women need expected mother parking.
Yeah. Anyway. So I read that trying to get better. I feel like I am. I'm still not sure I know what I need to do next, but I'm ready. When the opportunity comes along, I'll recognize it and take it.
Oh man, he's got that sign ready. He needs to know the words to write on it and where to walk around.
Yeah, well, that's one thing. So what I did spend my Audible credit on?
Yes.
Making It So by Patrick Stewart. A memoir.
Fantastic.
Just came out. Read by the author. Chef's kiss. Delightful. Everything I hoped it would be. It's fantastic. I'm about a third of the way through it, and I'm loving every minute. I can't wait to read some more of it.
If I bought an audiobook that was the memoir of Patrick Stewart, and Patrick Stewart wasn't reading it, I would burn down Audible. Like, there is no chance you can sell me a book about Patrick Stewart that's not read by the golden larynx of Patrick Stewart himself.
Oh, man, it is fantastic. He told this anecdote that I just can't get over about how halfway through the first season of filming Star Trek The Next Generation, he felt like the cast was having too much fun. And so he called everyone together in like the cast break room and gave them this lecture about how they needed to take it more serious and be professionals. And he said not only did they laugh him out of the room, but then for the next 10 years, every time something gets serious, they bring it up again.
Well, and that's because he's an old guy and he was classically trained. Man. He is a Shakespearean thespian.
Josh, how profoundly he goes into detail on what it means to be classically trained is what's blowing my mind right now. Like how serious the British are about that. And I found out that like one of the places I lived when we were in England is where he studied.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. Oh man.
So Patrick Stewart is one of those guys that is universally loved. He's like Tom Hanks. Like you can't. There's nothing that man has ever done to make him the bad guy.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm totally loving that book. I'm not even done with it yet, and I totally recommend it. Making It So by Patrick Stewart just came out. I was looking for a main topic for our podcast this week, and I was listening to another podcast, as you do, and I heard one, and I don't want to just copy what they did, so. It was the Freakonomics radio podcast, and they were making an episode in a series where they were talking about failures in the medical system. But kind of inside of this podcast was a little vignette where they interviewed a professor from the Harvard Business School named Amy Edmundson, and they were asking her about a book that she'd written called The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well, where she'd done some research into medical failures, but she'd come up with a unified theory of failure that I really liked, and that's what I want to talk about today.
I'll tell you what, Ben, you recommended this to me, like, hey, listen to this for the podcast and see what you're talking about. And then I listened to it, and then I read a little bit about it, and like, you're absolutely right. This is one of those things that, like, when it's introduced to you and you see it, it's so like forehead slappingly obvious, but until it is introduced to you, it's something that you would never think about.
So let's talk about what wrong looks like first, because I hear a lot of conversations, especially associated with Freakonomics, about the idea of failing. Some people treat failing like it's only and always something bad, that failing must be avoided at all costs. And there you have to identify failure, find out what caused it, prevent it from happening again in the future. And that's kind of this binary quantitative assessment of failure. Like the less failure, the better.
If I really wanted to get political, I would talk about how that's a failure in the American education system, where you like read all of this and now vomit it back out onto this piece of paper, and we're going to give you a pass or fail based on how well you remembered the things we told you to remember. And so failure is actively punished, not the process of learning or encapsulating or understanding. That's not prioritized or incentivized. It's the punishment of the failure. And then, so we all grow up as little kids and become adults in this society where if you fail, you are wrong. You did something incorrect, therefore thou must be punished. And oh man, we have a saying for this in the military, and it's
what is it?
Oh, it's freaking ants with sledgehammers, dude. Like
yes.
Any failure of an individual in the military is obviously a failure of everyone that person is associated with, and all of those people must be punished in order to create an environment where that kind of failure is unacceptable.
But we're open-minded, and occasionally we'll look at that kind of attitude and go, that's wrong. But sometimes our reaction to identifying something that was wrong is to go too far the other direction. So I'm going to read a quote here from the episode. They said, "We used to think of failure as the opposite of success. Now we're torn between two failure cultures. One says, avoid failure at all costs. The other says, fail fast, fail often. The trouble is that both approaches lack the crucial distinctions that help us separate good failure from bad. As a result, we miss the opportunity to fail well." So that's from Amy Edmundson. And I really like what she's getting at, because it's not never fail, and it's not fail as much as possible. It's understand the failure, and then you can make an appropriate decision about it.
And this was the part that was the forehead slapping part for me, was that when somebody fails at something or a process fails, that might not be a bad thing. You need to look at it and categorize, well, why did this fail? How did this fail? Do we just need to blanket punish this person? Or is this a systemic problem that we need to look at? And like, she actually breaks down like the different kinds of failure. And it's great. I love it.
Okay. So she needed a criteria to evaluate failure on a scale. The scale that she chose to use is blameworthy versus praiseworthy, which is all the way at one end of the spectrum is 100% of the blame is on the individual for the failure that happened. That they're deserving of blame in this instance of failure. And then at the other end of the spectrum is praise. Like, well, yeah, this fail was a good thing and the individual deserves to be praised for it. And everywhere along that spectrum are different kinds of failures. So unless the word that she uses to describe all the way the left-hand side of the spectrum is sabotage. That was the word she used in the podcast. So like, if you deliberately cause something to fail, that is the maximum amount of blame that you deserve.
Yes, this is an individual understanding the process and choosing deliberately to violate it. Like they are actively undermining what is supposed to be happening.
And then all the way at the other side of that is you understand the limitations, you're trying to make things better, and you do something and it fails, and through that failure you have learning, which leads to new knowledge, which helps improve everything. But that's the opposite.
Well, the opposite in that spectrum was cause. Like that failure was the experiment. Like that's experimentation. Like there's some portion of that you didn't understand, or there's external factors, whatever. You're uncertain about how it's going to happen. And so that's why the failure can be lauded, is because you found one way that didn't work.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to define about 6 steps along the spectrum of completely blame versus praiseworthy, and talk about the different distinctions and then what that means and what we can do about it. So the first step we mentioned was sabotage.
Oh, Ben.
Let me list off 6 and then we'll come back to them.
Okay.
So sabotage, inattention, inability, task challenge, uncertainty, and experimentation. Yeah, so let's go back to sabotage.
Yes. Again, I already said this because I love this idea so much. Individual knows what they're supposed to do. They understand the environment that they're working in, and they make the deliberate decision to go against the process. They break it on purpose. And whatever their reasons are, doesn't matter. They are sabotaging the process.
Yeah. Okay, so let's give an example to help do it. I'll give one from my childhood. So growing up, we frequently had gardens outside our house, sometimes very big ones. And one of my main household chores was to help maintain the garden, usually hoeing weeds. And I was notorious in my family growing up because I do not like the vegetable squash. And so sometimes when I was hoeing around the squash, I would
Oh,
be very
no. All the squash got destroyed by a careless person. How could this have happened?
That's an example of very all the way to the end on the blame spectrum for the failure of the squash to grow.
I have to ask follow-up questions. Did your family have that World War II prescribed 15-foot by 15-foot garden with like the various like vegetables and fruits to like sustain 4 to 6 people for an unknowable amount of time?
Yeah, but it wasn't based on government recommendations. There's a very strong culture in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints recommending self-sufficiency from gardening.
I'm going to say...
And my parents both grew up on farms.
If that garden was 15 by 15, you probably followed the World War II pamphlet. I'm going to find a link. I'm going to send it to you and like... No? All right.
When we were 15 and my dad got out of the Air Force, we moved to a farm and we had this garden that was the size of a barn. It was massive. And at the beginning of the week, I would start hoeing that garden. And by the end of the week, when I got into the end of it, it already had weeds again at the begining. And I would just start over the next week.
Well, you couldn't do the whole thing in one day? What kind of a slacker were you?
This was after school and I had seminary and a part-time job.
Did you have to walk up hills both ways to get there? Never mind. All right, we don't have to go there.
All right. That was my sabotage failure. What was yours?
Oh. Okay, I'm gonna feel a little vulnerable here because yours was very low stakes. I didn't like squash, so I sabotaged.
I hoed some squash. Okay, I'll give another one.
No, I'll give you. Let me give you mine first, and then see if you want to put yours on the same level. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So it's a badly kept secret on the podcast that I was a drone pilot for the U.S. Special Forces for several years. Yeah, this was during a time in the military where nobody wanted to be a drone pilot. Everybody that joined the Air Force to fly wanted to fly a real plane. They all imagined themselves as sitting in a P-51 flying in World War II, shooting down Stuka dive bombers and punching Hitler in the face. That's what these people signed up for. And then
that was a beautiful image.
Well, then to be told that, no, actually, you're going to be a computer nerd and you're going to
go live in New Mexico.
You're going to live in the worst parts of the world. Yeah, you're going to live in the worst parts of the world. You're going to be overworked, underpaid, undervalued. Everyone's going to make fun of you because you're not a real pilot. And oh, by the way, you're going to be on autopilot 99.9% of the time that you are flying. They didn't like that. And so there was a lot of disgruntled people in the entire organization from the ground up. From the people that were there against their will to the leadership that were picked like that, where, I was a fast burner in my real world actual piloting job. And because I was so good, they made me be in charge of a drone squadron that I hate. And the culture there was like toxic is not a strong enough word. Like I want to say acidic. Yeah. Like it actively eroded your patriotism and your desire to excel and your will to live. Like, and this is the job that finally crushed me. And there was so many little things that were going on. And the biggest problem was everything was always by the book. Everything was within the boundaries that were drawn by the regulations of the Air Force. But within those boundaries, there's a spectrum of decisions. There's the decisions that benefits your troops, and there's the decisions that benefit you as a person. And at the time that I was there, I felt like my leadership was making all of the decisions that were actively bad for the people that worked there and actively good for them. It made them look and seem better from an outside perspective. And so our lives, like I have so many specific examples that I can't talk about of how the decision that this person made actively made my life worse. And so while I would never sabotage an important non-fail process in the United States government or the United States military, I did absolutely everything within my power to try to get this culture changed. I was not the only one. There was me. There was like a cohort of like 3 or 4 other more experienced officers that were actively petitioning upper leadership, that were actively going to like the inspector general's office, that were actively going to like the safety office. The complexity
of this situation you're describing is compelling, Josh, because we always like to simplify our ideas about military order and discipline and think that we have these virtuous orders and blame-free chain of command. But what you're describing is really kind of toxic and dirty, and I could see why you wanted to resist a bit.
Well, go watch Band of Brothers, where you have all of these guys that know what their job is supposed to be, and their life is being ruined and actively put into danger by this first lieutenant who has ideas of grand things happening, and he has no idea how to do his job. Like, I'm not going to go as far as to say that the person that was in charge didn't know their job. They knew their job very well, but they were also working very hard to make themselves look very good so they would have future opportunities within the military. And in the meantime, his troops were suffering. And I was grown up and I was brought up in a place where, like, as an officer, my job is to make sure my troops' lives are as good as they can be while achieving the mission. And it was kind of, the only thing I could compare it to, and this is a really bad comparison, is like civil disobedience. I'm still doing my job. I'm still doing everything within the book that I'm supposed to be doing, but I'm also doing everything that I'm allowed to do to try to get my leadership fired. And
yeah, we call that malicious compliance.
There you go. Malicious compliance. That's a much better way of putting it. I was incredibly maliciously compliant with all of the regulations. And I very quickly earned a reputation in leadership that, one, I knew what I was doing, but two, I was a problem child. And that didn't help me at all. But that gets into personal stuff. It doesn't change the fact that I was actively trying to sabotage the leadership in that squadron.
Okay. I get that you're trying to be vulnerable there and describe it as blame, but with complex things, when you try to compare them on the scale, I realized that you could make a case for every step along the way. Like what you were describing there was a complex system where there was a lot of social and political pressures. There was demand for your capability. There was the training environment. There was the expectations. And a lot of that was beyond your personal control and not your fault.
Yeah.
So the amount of blame for the fact that you chose, what could probably describe superficially as sabotage is not that much.
Maybe. I don't. This was the closest thing I could come up with where I was actively countermanding, like not countermanding, like I was still doing what I was supposed to do, but I was actively working against the process that I was supposed to be working for. As an officer, you know this. What your leadership says, like even if you disagree with it, when you convey to your subordinates, well, this is what we're doing, we're going to salute smartly and go forward. And I did that to the best of my ability, but it was also softened and like colored by the idea that like what they're doing is absolutely wrong and is going to cause us so many problems in the future. So I'm like, okay, guys, this is how we're going to get through this. Like that was kind of the message. Instead of we're doing this and salute smart, we're going to go. It's more like, okay, guys, this is the damage control and this is how we're going to keep alive for the next 6 months.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to give another benign example. When in the early to middle part of my marriage, my wife and I were trying to cooperate on laundry, but we have very different ideas about what constitutes good laundry. So sometimes I would deliberately do things that she told me not to do so that she would notice them and then do it instead of asking me to do it.
Sabotage. Oh, that's a normal thing. Like that's like husbanding 101. Husbands, you don't like to do a chore? Do it super bad a couple of times. Your wife will never ask you to do it again.
Yeah. So that's very far to the left on the blame spectrum of this.
Yeah, that's actually your fault. You knew how to do laundry. How dare you?
Of this spectrum. What the term that she used for it was a spectrum of causes of failures, which ranges from blameworthy to praiseworthy. So the second one on the spectrum is inattention. I put as a subtitle for this like mailing it in or spaced out. What were some? How would you describe this one?
And that's exactly what it was. Everybody can think of this at work, at the work that they do. It doesn't matter what work you do. There is a task that is really important, that everybody knows is really important, but that you have done so many times that you can do it without thinking about it anymore. And like the easiest example is, that they even use it in the podcast we're talking about, is like driving a car. Like people make jokes about the fact that like you're controlling thousands of pounds of steel at ridiculous speeds going down the highway and through city streets where you could kill anyone at any time with an errant like sneeze. But everybody that has driven for any number of years has experienced the idea where they were driving for a long period of time and then kind of shook themselves and realized, oh, I've been driving and haven't been paying attention. I hope I stopped at all the stop signs.
Yeah, and as long as nothing errant happens during that time of inattention, then you kind of get away consequence-free. But right. If something errant does happen, then you can have pretty severe consequences, like happened to my son a few weeks ago when he crashed my truck. He, didn't check at the right time and pulled out in front of a car and got in a crash. So yeah, car crashes are a great example. He gave another Amy Edmundson gave another interesting example, or Stephen Dubner did, about this hotel that they were building in Kansas City that had a structural steel beam in it, and they had to make a rapid decision and replace one strong beam with two weaker beams, and the hotel fell and killed a bunch of people.
Yeah, and those kinds of attentions to detail are because, like, to the engineers that were making that decision, maybe the math all worked out, and they were in a rush or whatever. You can see how them not putting their full dedication into these plans then later on translates to this horrible disaster. But at the time that it happened, it was this totally benign thing.
Here's where I think this spectrum starts to have a lot of value. It's our knee-jerk reaction when an accident, when a failure of some kind happens that has real-world consequences, to try to identify a single culprit, usually an individual who had some degree of inattention. And then when we find that individual and the act of inattention, then we consider it case closed. We blame them, we prosecute them, we stop thinking about it and move on. But what we fail to notice is like patterns and systematic weaknesses that led to that situation that are beyond that individual's control.
So I have an example of this. I actually have several examples of this, and I swear I'm going to get off of the drone piloting probably. I don't know, maybe. But like, so everybody sees this on the news, or they used to, where there was a drone strike, and it was happening all the time. What they don't see is, like, for every time we fire a missile, there's actually like 3,000 hours of surveillance that happened before we actually shot that missile. And so, Ben, when you spend day in and day out just watching like the same house or the same car or the same set of bushes, complacency becomes a thing. Like, oh, guys, this is super. It's easy at the beginning of the day when you're fresh, you're coming into work. This is super important. This guy's a bad guy. We need to make sure we know everything about him. And then 8 hours of staring at an unmoving car later, like, good Lord, this sucks. Now, multiply that by 365 days over the course of your year. Like, at the beginning of every flight, we had to fill out a little checklist that said, what are the biggest safety factors? What are the concerns that we have? And then we brief it to everybody that's on the crew. These are the things that we need to look out for as the things that are a danger to our mission. And number one on my list, every single mission I flew, was complacency. I said, it is way too easy for us to get quiet and for us to fall asleep, literally fall asleep while the plane is on autopilot. So we need to make sure that we're actively involved and that we're talking about what we're doing and that we're doing things to keep us active and involved with the mission.
That feels like a system where the human is the weakest link in the whole thing.
Well,
like,
and that's,
if we're relying on the ability of a human being to concentrate on one boring task for 8 hours, do you know what machines are really good at?
Yes, very boring, mundane, repetitive tasks. And this is why that they put this as
are not.
This is number 2 on the spectrum. Like, there's things where I'm actively trying to break this. That's the most blameworthy of the person. But then inattention, yeah, most of the blame is on the person that fell asleep while they were driving the car. But some of the blame has to be put on, like, why was he in that situation in the first place? Like, what circumstances surrounded him being in a place where his inattention can cause such a failure?
Yeah. So one I recognized for me was when I got here, we had a detachment of about 400 Italians here, and I was like, hey, an opportunity for me to kind of dust off my Italian language skills that I hadn't really practiced since 2014 and maybe have a chance to make some new friends. So my daughter likes to go on Duolingo and study Spanish, and that app, we've never talked about it on the podcast, but it's really good about creating social networks where you're supporting each other, encouraging each other, provoking each other to try to do better. And so I got on there, and my daughter and I started being friends, and I started studying Duolingo. And every day I'm doing Italian lessons, and it has you practice reading, writing, speaking, and listening. It's pretty good like that.
Wow.
Anyway, I found that if I'm at the end of the day, I'm trying to keep my streak alive, like I'm on a Snapchat or something like that, and I just pull it up and I'm kind of going through it, I'll get about 60 to 70%. But if I sit up straight and I'm wide awake and I really focus on it, I can get 100% almost every time on the tasks that it gives you. And that's a big difference, like 60% to 100%.
Definitely.
And it really is just about attention. And sometimes I don't even have that attention to give because I'm tired, because there was a lot that happened that day, I'm distracted, those kinds of things. And I bet if you could somehow extract the data from that app that I've done now for 110 days in a row, you could point out days that I'm more likely to make mistakes that are cognitive mistakes because those are the days my attention is taxed.
Maybe. But on the other end of the spectrum, I'm going to tell you, Ben, that 60% is better than 0%. The fact that you open that app and force yourself to study at all is better than having not done it in the first place. So good on you, buddy.
Yeah. All right. The third stop on the spectrum of I need to remind myself what this thing's called because I keep forgetting it. The spectrum of causes of failures is inability. The individual lacks the knowledge, attitude, skills, or perception required to execute a task. This is slightly different than inattention. Inattention is assuming you have the skills and you just failed for a minute, and this is more like maybe you don't have the skills.
Maybe the situation or the task that you're being asked to do is more complex than you're capable of handling.
Yeah.
This is the example that they give was the asking a kid to ride a bike for the first time. Like, it seems like riding a bike is easy. You just turn the pedals and you go, right? But kids can't ride a bike right at first because they are unable. They don't have the ability to balance subconsciously the way that people who ride bikes do.
Right, and this gets at the heart of what I'm trying to point out here, which is that example you gave is a great example where failure is really important. Like there's no way to get to being able to ride a bike from not being able to ride a bike without some failures.
Yes.
And can you imagine if the first time a kid got on a bike, if like they fell over and then you point at them and laugh or shout at them, like, you stupid idiot, why can't you do this? Or, aha, you suck at riding a bike. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And you can see the blame spectrum. Like, there's no need for blame in that situation where you're failing due to inability. You just need to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. It goes back to what I said at the beginning about the education system. A lot of times failure isn't a bad thing to be punished. It's an opportunity to learn. Okay, that didn't work. What can we learn from what you failed at? Like, why did you fail? How did you fail? What didn't you get right? What did you learn from that experience? How will you do it different next time? That is like the learning cycle.
There's an interesting idea in business writing that they talk about called the Peter Principle. I think we've talked about it on the podcast. Do you remember what the Peter Principle is?
Ooh, yes. This is the idea that you get promoted one level higher than you should be.
Yes, because the way that we tend to promote people is based on past performance rather than on future potential, if you could even measure that. And so you tend to get promoted above, finally to a level where you fail. Because you don't have the skills to do the next thing you've been asked to do.
My favorite example of this is Stephen Carell's role in The Office, where he was the manager, Michael Scott. There it is. Okay, Scott. In The Office. Yeah. I don't watch a lot of Office. Everybody can tell. It's been a long time.
Me either.
But here's the thing. Like, there's a handful. Like, he's a terrible manager. Like, by any stretch of the imagination. Every episode you watch, he's doing all of the wrong things.
Good intention, bad execution.
But here's the thing. There was a few episodes where they show him just doing sales, where he goes out and he's like talking to a client and trying to sell them and pitch them his product. And it's amazing. It's a night and day difference in the person's capability. And so it's clear to see this is why he got promoted to manager, even though he's a terrible manager, is because he was an amazing salesperson. We're going to promote this guy, keep him in the organization, move him on up, get him more money. But he's terrible at the job that you now put him into.
So Michael Scott is a living embodiment of the Peter Principle. Yes. So inability is the next kind of failure. I thought back on an example I had from when I was 21. I took a job as a temp, and they brought me to this company that made adhesives, like a glue factory, literally a glue factory. And this glue factory was in the process of trying to obtain, I know this is really boring and bureaucratic, I'm going to try to make it interesting, was trying to obtain an industry specification called ISO 9001, which meant that they conform to a complete set of processes that guarantee quality control in their product, in their production and sales, so that they are safe and efficient and all those kinds of things. So in all of the process of preparing for this, there was a whole bunch of compliance things they had to do, and they didn't have the manpower to do it. So they brought me in as a temp, and they said, hey, we're required by law to maintain a library of what are called material safety data sheets for all of the raw chemicals that we acquire and keep on hand. The point of it being, from a safety perspective, is if we spill that vat of stuff right there, what do we do with it? What if a guy gets it in his eyes? What if he gets it on his hands? What do we do? So then they have a library of documents that answer all those questions. Is it flammable? What if you breathe it? All those kinds of things. Do I need to wear a mask? Can I look at it directly without sunglasses? Whatever. Just all that stuff. And not only do you have to have the library of documents, but it need to be within a certain age. I'm guessing that the internet has made this task utterly trivial, but this is before the internet.
Yes, just keeping all of these random chemical documentation updated.
So they brought me in as a temp off the street and showed me this dusty old file cabinet full of just these arcane chemical materials safety data sheets, MSDSs they call them, and said, you need to contact the original producer of all these chemicals and get them to provide you the most updated copy of all of these things. You could describe that task in like 10 seconds. In execution, I was utterly unable to accomplish it. Like, I just failed.
Yeah.
I just
You're calling multi-million-dollar, like, industrial complex, like, companies. Be like, hey, who's your guy that answers random chemical questions about the stuff that you sell? Like, just penetrating that bureaucracy must have been a nightmare.
Like I'm saying, now with the internet, I bet you can pay $10 a month and subscribe to MSDS.com, and when a chemical comes in the door, you scan it with a like a barcode scanner, and now it's in your library. Like, that's it. Done.
Absolutely. There's no way that that isn't a thing.
But in 1998, it was virtually impossible, and I couldn't do it, and I got fired. And I still feel crappy about it.
You didn't have there's so much knowledge gap there. Like, I mean, I would start with without the internet, how does it even work? Like, you look this place up in the yellow pages and just call their customer facing number. Hey, this is who I am. Do you, random person that answered the phone, have any idea what I'm talking about?
Yes. That's exactly what it was like for everyone. Like, I'd pull some dusty old document out of the file cabinet and I'd call the company and they'd change names, or they're at a new headquarters, or it was the wrong phone number.
About that. Sir, this is a Taco Bell. Like,
yeah, exactly.
No chance.
It was horrible, but I was unable to do this task and I got fired.
That's outstanding.
It still hurts that I got fired at a job that I look back on and I think that's easy, but I guess I've gotten better at things.
All right. We're still talking about drones. I swear this is the last one. I promise. We'll go on to even more boring.
This is an inability one?
This is an inability one. So I mentioned earlier that drones occasionally will shoot missiles after we've had a ton of time looking at a target, okay? Well, we actually have to aim those things. Like, we have to, like, say, oh, well, we want the missile to hit here, and there's a lot that goes into that. Like, it's not just like as easy as they want, like comedians make it say, like, oh, just push a button and things die. It's like, there's a little more to it than that. But a lot of it is skill based, and not everybody has the same level of skills when you go into these organizations. Are you going up to the next level? What's the next level?
Task challenge.
No. This is still inability.
Okay, you're still on inability.
I'm still on inability. Yeah. Like, there are newer people, like, if they first came in, like, they've gone through training satisfactorily, but like, they may not have the ability to like do it in real life. Like, there's a difference between doing it like for fun or like as a test on a simulator and then doing it for real. And so there was a discussion at one point about, like, oh, well, what happens if one of the brand new people are called on to do one of these incredibly important things that are very stressful and very complex,
but only happen a small percentage of the time.
But happen a very small percentage of the time. And then, so there was a discussion, why don't we just take our absolute most senior dudes, the guys that have done it 100 times, and just have them ready to step in and replace them? And then it turns into this, like, if you imagine like the House of Commons, where one side of the room is just yelling at the other side of the room because they have problems with what they're saying, that's what happened. That's what it devolved into. Because one side's like, yeah, that would be great. That would make our lives so much easier. We wouldn't have to worry about the most stressful part. But then the other side's like, yeah, and now you're creating this A team, B team structure where these are, like, you're codifying, these are the people that suck and these are the people that are awesome. And, like, what is that going to do for careers? What's that going to do for promotion? What's that going to do for their freaking, like, mental health? Like, it was a whole kerfuffle.
Josh, you just made my prefrontal cortex light up like a Christmas tree. Okay, before as a school teacher, I worked for tech support for Microsoft, and that's how tech support works. You sit in a cubicle far away, you have a mission set to do. 99% of the time, the calls that come in are easy to handle, and anybody could do it. You just need a dummy with a checklist. But 1% of the time, the issues are complicated, and you need your tier 2 or tier 3 tech support to deal with those issues. And that's the way you build your whole support structure. You have a whole bunch of people at the bottom level that can handle all the easy stuff, and then have a few guys that you hold in reserve that when a hard thing comes up, they acknowledge it and punt it up the chain to the next level guy who can handle it. And that's just business. That's just regular way of doing business. I think the drone pilots were stumbling into what's a very usual thing in these kinds of execution.
And while I agree with you, that's the reason that they have tiered support structures like that, because every once in a while you get the hard questions, and you don't need as many people that can answer the hard questions as many people that answer the easy questions. The problem was that the military bureaucracy wasn't built to accommodate that kind of segregation of skilled versus unskilled.
Have-nots.
Exactly. And then it wouldn't take long for people external to the organization to understand, oh, were you, and then pick the keyword. And then if the answer is yes or no, that can have ramifications on what they think about you, and therefore what your follow-on assignments are going to be, like where you're going to get stationed, what kind of jobs they're going to ask you to do. Like, this would have real-world consequences for a very long time if they had decided to do it that way.
I think the main characteristic of this tier in the spectrum of causes of failures is that inability can be overcome, that these are examples of tasks that you can get smart enough, you can fix the process, you can teach the person, they can eventually do it. Everyone is capable of doing this minimum level task. The next tier on the spectrum of causes of failures is task challenge. And that is the idea that maybe there are tasks that are too challenging for reliable fail-free performance.
Yes. I love the example that they give was like the NASA shuttle program being like
or Olympic gymnasts.
Yes, like Olympic gymnasts are amazing athletes and they're at the peak of their condition, but like even though they're at the 99% of what a human being can be physically, they're being asked to do like the 99.1%, and like they're like, it doesn't matter how good they are, they're going to fail occasionally.
At some point, they're not going to be able to do the quadruple backflip with 4 twists.
Yeah, exactly.
Not going to land it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My example for this one, Ben. Oh, you're going to love this because I'm out of drones and I'm into tax now. We're talking about taxes, baby.
Okay.
So everybody's jazzed up because the IRS says they're going to put out we're going to put out a tool online where you can file your taxes for free directly with the IRS. And Ben, I laughed out loud so hard and for so long.
Because you know that this is so complicated of a thing that people are going to screw it up?
I have 2 certifications that involve federal tax law, and I don't know like a tenth of it, okay?
Yeah.
There is so much nuance and so many if-thens and so many yeah-buts and so many kind of but not reallys that there is no chance that anybody, listeners, if your like financial situation is any more complicated then you have a W-2 job, like, do not expect the IRS free filing tool to work for you, because there are way too many nuanced things that you can dive into that go super deep, super quickly, that the layperson just doesn't know how to handle. And it's not any fault. It's not because it's unknowable. It's not because it's unlearnable. It's because it's so giant and convoluted, it's impossible to hold all of the rules in your head simultaneously.
While I get that, this is another example where like a computer program can handle most of that. So that's why, people use like just an interview application or a website that does it to get you through most of that.
Okay, Ben, but the problem is that there are too many decisions and areas for interpretation that you can make as the taxpayer and or the tax professional.
You're absolutely right.
You don't even know what I'm talking about. You're like, nope, I don't even want to talk about this. Just give him his point.
Don't want to get into that. I agree that there are some tasks, and definitely the U.S. tax code is one of them, where the task is too challenging for reliable fail-free performance. Yes, there's an inattention, inability aspect to it, but ultimately there's just going to be situations that are too hard and too complicated. There are organizations
that make tens of thousands of dollars like on one client because their stuff is so complicated. They have to hire a room full of people to sit and think about it for months before they can prepare it on a form and file it.
I told this story on the podcast, but it was a long, long time ago, so I'm going to tell it again. Maybe a decade and a half ago, I was out at the BX food court with my sons, and I decided I want to have a little learning experiment with them. So I sat down at a table at the center of the food court, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to give you guys some money. You guys can go buy your own food and then bring it back. Just get a little something for me. And they're like, okay. So I think they were like 11 and 9. And I looked at my wallet, and I didn't have any small bills. So all I had was like 3 or 4 20s. So I gave them each a 20. I'm like, here's one for you. Here's one for you. Go get some food and bring it back.
I love this story. This is one of my favorite stories that you have for parenting.
They both went to Taco Bell and decided that they needed to maximize their $40, and they ordered things off the menu until they spent like $39.28 or something like that, and they came back with like 74 cents and change.
You
and
told
an
them
entire
yeah.
2 trays full of like every item on the Taco Bell menu.
This is a failure, and this failure is because like you communicated, here's some money. Go get food and go get food. Leave it there. Your implication was that get food for yourself that would satisfy your hunger in this moment. What they heard was, here is $20. Go spend every penny of it on food.
Okay, well, you're making a good point, and that you've kind of been making this point all along, that in a situation where a failure it's easiest to blame the person that was present when the failure occurred and say they're accountable for the failure. But in a lot of cases, it's the system, it's the functions, it's the environment that leads to the failure. And in this case, it was me, the task that I created for them that was unclear, not well specified, and they didn't have the skill set for it. And that was the reason for the failure, more so than their execution.
Yes, and that's what we're talking about, this spectrum of blame, right? Like on the left, like the sabotage is like, it's the person that did it, it's their fault. As we've been talking, every instance that we move up is less that person's blame, and more of the blame shifts to the circumstances and the environment and the system that's asking them to do this thing.
Yeah. So tax is a good one. Another one I thought of that came to mind was I'd read Malcolm Gladwell's book where he talked about there being this high incidence of what they called wheels up crashes in the late 80s, early 90s, which is where pilots would land after a long flight and forget to put the landing gear down. And they would blame the pilot and try to come up with figuring out why they were too tired or why they weren't well trained enough and stuff. But when you try to kill ants with sledgehammers with, pilots, no pilot wants to land with the landing gear down. And somebody was like, wait a minute, maybe what we're asking them to do is too hard. And so they looked in the cockpit, and you have like this row of indescript buttons with unclear indicators and millions of warnings and stuff. And it just wasn't clear that they had or hadn't done the right thing. And so they redesigned the cockpit so it was really obvious when it was wrong and really obvious when it was right. And it completely went away.
Specifically for this instance, every cockpit that you sit in that you will ever see, the landing gear lever is literally shaped like a wheel on the plane. Like, it's not round. It's not rounded. They took like a little toy wheel and shoved it onto the end of the landing gear lever, and that's the landing gear lever. Like in every cockpit. And yeah, speaking from experience, I have sat in multiple planes. I have trained in multiple planes. Every single one of them with retracting landing gear, the lever is shaped like the landing gear.
And that's a good example of a system that's designed to eliminate inattention, inability, task challenge from the equation, so that then failure would really have to be sabotage.
There's no way you didn't know. The thing lights up when they're down. Like, there's no way you didn't know that the landing gear was down.
Yeah. Now, in my current job as an exec, I control basically 3 people's calendars. Well, not just 3 people's calendars. I control hundreds of people's calendars, because any appointment I make with the commander involves like this endless cascade of action officers and ancillary offices of primary responsibility and corollary responsibility and secondary responsibility and all that kind of thing.
Here's the dirty little secret about upper echelon military leaders, listeners, is that person actually doesn't really do a whole lot. That person says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then an army of people trying to impress them go to work in the background.
I'm not going to argue with that. I love that simplification of the situation. So my job is to always make sure that the boss is in the right place, so that that army of people can come to them at the right time with the right information, and then present that decision for them to say, yes, that's a good idea, or I don't like that idea, let's do this instead. However, because of the complexity of all of this, every now and then I cause an accident. Two meetings run up against each other. The right person wasn't in the room at the right time. People didn't have the right information to create the decision properly. And sometimes it's my fault. But the task challenge is so high. Like, it's not an easy thing to do, to keep track of all these balls and all these people and all of these different responsibilities and stuff. And sometimes I'm just going to mess it up.
Well, and this
sucks, and I hate it, I try to get better at it.
But for you, yes, and of course the internal is I will get better, and dang it, I screwed up. I'm gonna make it better next time. But externally, you get to look that person that you screwed over in the eye and be like, well, why didn't you know about this thing that was happening? Do you really want me to be the bad guy right now? Do you want to give me a reason to forget to CC you on future emails? Like, you need to walk on by, sir.
Josh, you are a lawful evil exec at heart, I can tell.
Yeah.
All right. So the next step on the spectrum here is uncertainty. And that is the idea that even if you are paying attention, you have the ability, the task isn't too challenging, at some point something random's going to happen that there was no possible way to foresee, and there's going to be a failure. This is really low on the blame spectrum. Like, if it really is just truly something you couldn't have foreseen, how could you possibly be blamed for it? And this one's also kind of hard to plan away.
No, I mean, yes, you can only, it's uncertainty. Like, by definition, you don't understand what's going to happen. Like,
it's an unknown, to quote Donald Rumsfeld.
There are so many consulting agencies out there that will tell you, oh yeah, pay us tens of thousands of dollars and we will reduce your uncertainty, but they will never tell you that they will eliminate all uncertainty in future courses of action. They can't, by definition.
Yeah. One of the examples they gave in the podcast when they talked about this was a blind date. Like, you can give the perfect venue and get two people together that maybe by all intents and purposes should get along, and they just don't. It's a failure, but you couldn't have known.
Yeah. There's too many variables involved. There's too many unknown unknowns, just like you said earlier. For this one, I'm going to stick with taxes. The firm that I actually just left, yesterday was my last day. It was bittersweet, and I turned in all my stuff, and I lost access to all my logins. Like,
wow, that was yesterday?
That was yesterday.
This is momentous. Let's pause here for a second.
Oh, jeez. Don't get sappy on me now.
Well, okay, so how long did you do that job for?
I did that job for 5 years.
Okay, so after 5 years, have you ever done a job for 5 years?
I was a pool guy for 5 years.
Okay. All right, so you have two jobs you've done for 5 years. How does it feel? You're turning a page in life and taking on a new challenge?
So people always ask me, like, how do you feel? Are you excited? Are you so jazzed about the new thing? And I always say, like, I can't think about the new thing because there was too much stuff that I had to do between now and the new thing. Like, this entire last week that I was working, I had a checklist. Like, these are the things that I must accomplish, like, for my own peace of mind. Could I have just slacked off and watched TV the whole time I was logged in? Yeah, sure. But, like, I'm not that person. And so these are the things that I want to make sure are done and bolted down before I turn over, all of my stuff to the firm. And so I was just churning through that. And I didn't have any room in my brain to feel any way about it because I had stuff to do. I was just focusing on knocking these chores out. But then, like, Thursday a little bit, and then on Friday, when I was getting to the bottom of my list and I was checking everything off, and then Friday, like, noontime, I checked the last item on the list, and then it all, like, kind of hit me at once, like, holy crap. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. I've never done this for or with anyone else, and now I'm moving on to, like, this position of higher responsibility where, like, they're going to expect me to tell other people how to do their jobs. And, like, yeah, I got some butterflies, a little anxiety, but no, it's going to be a good transition. I only ever get nervous, like, listeners, like younger listeners, everybody, they can probably equate to this. If you're feeling nervous about doing a new thing, you need to recognize you're not nervous because you don't think you can do the thing. You're nervous because you don't know what the new thing is. You're nervous because there's uncertainty. You're nervous moving to a new job because you're uncertain what the day-to-day is going to be like. Are you going to get along with your coworkers? Where are you going to eat lunch? How long is it going to take me to drive home every day? And until you fill in that uncertainty, you're going to have some level of anxiety.
And the reason we're anxious about uncertainty is because it sometimes leads to failure.
Yes, and I hate failure because of all the reasons. And like I don't accept failure in my life.
All
and
right,
so
well,
I'm
whatever you do,
nervous.
don't send an email to the entire company and then try to recall it.
If I send an email, all right, so that's the thing. When you send an email to the entire organization, it's all about how you handle it. Like if you immediately get in front of it and become part of the joke, then it's just part of the joke. Now, if you try to recall it and have to be reminded by the failed recall messages that you receive for months and months on end, let's take another tangent for a second, Ben. Let's time out on this tangent and go to another tangent. You sent a wing-wide email to everybody in the organization back when you almost first started, and then you tried to recall it. And when they fail, you get the notification that it fails. And I proposed on that podcast that you would be getting those until the day you left. Are you still getting notifications of those delivery or failures like to this day?
The last one I got was about 3 weeks ago,
but
okay. It's not too late. Maybe I'll get another one.
It's not
I don't
too
know.
late.
But you just gave me some real clarity and something I'd never realized. Every time the military gives you lots of opportunities to get new jobs, and every time I go to a new job, I get all that anxiety you were talking about. But I didn't realize that what makes the anxiety go away is the elimination of the uncertainty. Once I've been there long enough that I feel like I can predict the routine, I understand the battle rhythm, I know the heartbeat that's happening in the organization, I feel like everything's predictable, then the anxiety goes away. It's the uncertainty that's the source of the anxiety, because uncertainty leads towards failure.
Exactly. And so that's what this is what I use. This is my mantra to combat the anxiety that I feel starting a new job is I'm not going to fail at this new job. I just don't know some things. And once I know them, I'll feel better. And that's what I'm constantly telling myself to suppress the knee-jerk reaction of, oh, everything's changing.
Yeah. So there was some uncertainty that I had no idea to be wary of, and that was like a geopolitical, socioeconomic factor. And that was, I joined the Air Force in the year 2004, which, if you consider the fact that officers are joining out of college, that means that when the post-September 11th patriotism wave, everyone that went down and signed up for ROTC all joined the Air Force the same year that you and I did.
You're right. Okay.
And it created this big wave of like too many people. And for the next decade, there was all kinds of impacts that had to the assignments and promotion and training and preparation systems that happened because of that giant wave in society.
So we were both comm officers, like communication officers. That was our specialty. And our career field and our group year had gone through multiple cuts. Like there's too many of you. We need to get rid of like the chaff. And you would have to submit basically a package.
It happened 3 times in my year group.
Yeah, and keep reapplying for your own job to keep it. And I remember I transitioned towards the end of my career into being a pilot. And then, like, towards the end,
they start paying you retention bonuses.
Well, no, but then this was the first time that pilots like went through a stop loss or went through, a cut. Like, hey, we have too many pilots. We need to get rid of some of you all. And everybody in the squadron was freaking out. Is your stuff up to date? Is everything good to go? And I'm sitting in the chair like, dude, I've been through like
I've done this 3 times already.
3 of these. I don't care. Like, my stuff's good. I know it's good. Like, why are you freaking out?
Yeah. So in this uncertainty space, another thing I like to think about is something that I read this book called Nuclear Accidents that talks about like every known accident we've ever had with nuclear weapons, which, by the way, if you add up all the deaths from all the nuclear accidents, they don't even add up to like 1 year of coal mining. But
there's a stat for you.
Yeah. That aside, there's this idea specifically in complex systems of what's called a system accident or a normal accident. The idea of a normal accident is an unanticipated interaction of multiple failures. This complexity can either be of technology or of human organizations, and frequently both. A system accident can be easy to see in hindsight, but extremely difficult in foresight because there are simply too many action pathways to seriously consider all of them. So sometimes it isn't like uncertainty in the form of randomness, it's uncertainty in the form of nearly infinite possibilities. And amongst all of those possibilities of all these interacting humans and systems, there's a path that's going to emerge that led to a failure, and in hindsight it's going to look obvious, but at the time there was no way you could possibly consider all of the possibilities.
Right. This is too big.
Too many. 3 Mile Island, great example.
Okay. Well, there you go. We should read a book about nuclear disasters and talk about it on the podcast.
Awesome. Let's get to the last one. So the last one in the in Amy Edmundson's spectrum of causes of failures is experimentation. Science.
This is almost like you're going into something expecting to fail because you're attempting to learn something.
Because failure is elimination of a possibility.
Yes, and maybe like going through the process of with all the uncertainty, you learn some more things, and things that were uncertain before become certain now to better inform your decisions into the future.
So we started off this podcast by talking about Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison notoriously said, I did not fail 10,000 times to invent the light bulb. I found 10,000 things that didn't work.
I'm one of the Tesla fanboys. Like, Tesla was a smarter person, but a worse businessman, and therefore he is relegated to the annals of history, whereas Thomas Edison was like this, he was this guy, this genius.
Social intelligence matters too.
Yeah, it does.
So this at the far end of the spectrum, we don't consider, not only do we not consider this kind of failure to be blameworthy, we consider it to be the opposite. It's praiseworthy. We look at this kind of failure as advancement and progress. And it's easy to see here at this end of the spectrum why we don't do, well, he failed at that scientific experiment. He should be fired. Like, right. In the middle between sabotage and science is this cloudy portion where we tend to focus more on blame, but maybe we should praise the middle kinds of failures a little more.
I have an example for this one that is at the opposite end of the spectrum from drone strikes and super high, like super important, super urgent things that were happening. I'm going to go back to my days as a pool man. So, Ben, if you've ever had a pool, anybody that's had a pool knows that typically they are turned on and off by a mechanical timer. This is an old thing. It's been around for decades. It's got a little switch on it. It's got a yellow face. It's made by Intermatic. Doesn't matter. The thing sticks around forever because it just works. If there's power to it, it keeps time. It turns the pool off.
Simplistic and mechanical, but it works.
Yes. A very low failure rate. They last forever. Nothing wrong with it. But in today's day and age, Ben, people don't want mechanical things. I don't want to have to walk around my house and open a cabinet and flip a switch to turn my fountains on. That's ridiculous. My guests should be able to see my fancy waterfall feature in my pool at the flick of a button, at the very whim of my idea. And so there are companies that have created what they call automation systems for your pool equipment. Okay. And
Bluetooth and an app.
I talked to some of the people, like the actual people that built this stuff at conventions and things, like, hey, you have this automation system. Why does it suck so bad? Why is it so terrible?
You would ask a question like that.
And I had a guy finally level with me, look me in the eye, and he goes, listen, we're in the pool industry. We don't attract the world's greatest engineers. And I was like, thank you. Now I know. Anyway. So
now you're back. Wait, you went all the way back to inattention or inability.
Well, I'm getting there. Let me tell this whole story. I got to set the whole groundwork. All right. So most automation systems, at the time that I was a pool guy, there was 2 automation systems, and they were big. When I say big, I mean physically large, like 3 foot by 2 foot giant cabinets of electronics that I would have to bolt to a brick wall and spend an entire afternoon rewiring all of their pool equipment and then programming their app on their phone to get it all to work right. I did that, and I was good at it, but in a lot of situations, it's overkill. Like there's a critical mass where, like, once you reach this level, it makes sense to have a system that's this complicated. I had one customer, he had a little tiny pool. He had one extra pump that would run his waterfall. And he's like, can I just turn my waterfall on my phone? And I was talking to him, and I realized I had just been at a convention, and I just realized there's a manufacturer that had come out with like their automation system, but light. They came out with like a really stripped down, bare bones basic version. So instead of being like the Cadillac and doing absolutely everything, like this is a lot tuned down. This will do a handful of things, but it will do it really well. But I personally had never put that thing in before. I had never installed it. I had never worked with it. I had never done any of the software like integration with the guy's phone. And I leveled with him. I told him, listen, if you want this to work flawlessly, guaranteed, then I have to sell you like a $3,000 system. However, there is a brand new thing that just came out. I know very little about it. If you're willing to let me install it on your house, I will install it for my cost, because I will be learning about it as well. And I will learn if it's good, if it's bad, and I will know for my future customers if this is something that I can install or something
that was
that
really
I can
ethical of you. The first time I pruned a palm tree, I told the guy I knew what I was doing and went out and learned on his tree.
Yeah, I'm nothing if not brutally honest, even to my own detriment. So,
Okay.
But the guy agreed. He paid the cost for the system. I installed it, and it turned out to be crap. Like it didn't do, like it did what it advertised that it was going to do, but like the integration with the cell phone app was really spotty. And like from my perspective, it did what I wanted it to do. From his perspective, it was hit or miss. Like, can I turn the fountain on with my phone? He could about half the time, depending on what Wi-Fi network he was connected to and those kinds of things.
Oh my gosh.
But that's something that I can't control, right? That's the software engineer's problem. And like, that's what I told him. Like, listen, I'm sorry, this sucks. Here's how you work the system over here manually, just like you worked it manually before. And hopefully maybe someday they'll come out with a software update that will fix the problems you have with it.
So why was this a good failure?
This was a good failure because I walked away from this, like, no blame to me. And like the customer he was basically in the same position he was in before, where he had to walk over to the cabinet and click the buttons manually. But I had learned valuable information about this specific product and this offering from this company. So you
controlled the negative impacts and learned something new.
Exactly.
So net win.
Yes. I knew not to install that for customers.
I think that's exactly the right kind of way of looking at exploration. I wanted to ask you about your own pool software that you'd made. I assume you learned lots of lessons like that when you published Pool Notes.
Oh,
Listeners,
geez.
if you've never been to poolnotes.com, check it out.
Don't even. Yes, so the shortest version of the story possible. I started doing pools, and I needed a way to keep track of what I did for my customers throughout the day.
You were an anomaly, Josh. Just like the guy at the pool convention said that this industry doesn't attract the smartest people. Well, somehow they got you for 5 years.
Yeah, the standard for pool guys was to just write everything down. You had a clipboard, all your customers written down, and you would write notes. And then at the end of the month, you would sit down, you would try to decipher your handwritten garbage notes that were now a month old and figure out what you needed to bill your customer. And I'm a software guy. I have a computer science background. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And so
why can't I design an app?
Why can't I have an app on my phone? So I made a website that will create a database with all custom fields that I programmed myself for things that I found useful. And I kept adding onto it, and adding onto it, and adding onto it. And when I finally showed it to my dad and my brother, who are also pool guys, they're like, this is amazing. You must make this available for people to use. So I had to rebuild the software from the ground up with the intention of selling it to other people. So you have to make it there's things you have to do. I had to make it modular. I had to make it work with variables that I wasn't considering. And I sold it. It's a software product that you can go buy. Listeners, if any of you are a pool guy and you need an online solution to track all of your customers and your billings, I've got that for you. Go to poolnotes.com. Give me a call. Dude, what's funny is we just pushed Pool Notes on this podcast, and I swear I am trying to get away from it. I only have 5 paying customers. I don't the phone number that's published on the website. I don't think I have access to anymore. It's dying. It's going away.
I love the idea that potentially in the Venn diagram of listeners of this podcast and pool people in search of an automated database solution for tracking their customer interactions, that there is potentially an overlap.
There's no chance. There's no chance. There are other options. Don't use mine. If somebody else signs up for mine, that's just more incentive to keep this thing that's on life support as it is.
Okay, so in Dr. Amy Edmundson's The Science of Failing Well, The Right Kind of Wrong, she lists her idea of the spectrum of causes of failures on the spectrum of blameworthiness, and she has sabotage, inattention, inability, task challenge, uncertainty, and experimentation. From most blameworthy to least blameworthy.
So the next time you fail, or your kids fail, or something fails around you, take a second and ask yourself, who's really to blame here? Is this the person's fault, or is this more of a systemic problem? Or both? It could be a mix of both, but that doesn't leave the system blameless. Are there things I can do to fix the system?
So as I was thinking of examples of this, I stumbled across a few things that I felt like it fit on every step.
Interesting. Okay.
You could blame the failure on sabotage. You could blame it on inattention. You could blame it on inability, task challenge, uncertainty, or exploration. And I realized that unless you focus on a very specific incident. Like, for instance, the one I thought of was us making this podcast. Like, us making this podcast, we started with nothing and built it from the ground up. And if you go back and listen to the first 20 episodes, you can hear us failing all over the place, trying to figure out what it is we're trying to do, how to do it, what the format is, how to interact with each other, how to talk in this format and those kinds of things. And I realized that it's because we had failures of every kind.
Did we? I haven't listened to the first 20 episodes in forever. Maybe I should. They must be train wrecks.
There was exploration. There was randomness. Some of it was just really freaking hard. Sometimes we just didn't know the right things to focus on. Sometimes we hadn't learned the right skills yet. And sometimes maybe we just did stupid stuff on purpose.
Well, I'm going to tell listeners, like, listen to episode 9, The Italian Job, because that story is insane, and I still can't believe it's a real thing. And then probably skip to, I don't know.
Well, if you come to the Bad and Magic podcast because you want to, because here's my closing thought. We call this the Bad at Magic podcast, and we do bad at parenting and bad at husbanding and bad at fathering because we're recognizing the importance of failure in life. Yeah, we're bad at this stuff, but we're trying to get better. It's one of the core values of the podcast is that we embrace failure.
Oh, man, look at this retroactive applying like principles to why we titled it this way.
Yeah. So if you have ideas about failure, I'd love to hear about yours. You can go on our Facebook page and interact with us there. See all the failure memes I post this week, or you can go to our subreddit and interact anonymously and give us your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. It's crazy the amount of visibility we can get from a single 5-star review. And if you want me and Ben to continue to be bad at stuff and tell you about how bad we are at things from now until the end of time, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.